As evident from last week's slides, the 60s did not end well, and the 70s did not begin well. The discontent from world events continued into the decade of the 1970s. The music reflected this downturn as well, with softer, somewhat inward-focused music that in some instances lacked heavy social and political content, and from time to time took experimental directions. This slide is a short montage of some of the music that represents some of the changed mood of the 1970s. Some are more pop-oriented, while other artists were much more singer-songwriter focused, with personal messages on a variety of subjects. By the second half of the decade, disco dominated the charts, and its very dominance threatened many in traditional rock music. Drums in disco music were created with machines, putting drummers out of business. In many ways, disco represented the ultimate in escapist music for a decade, trying to define an identity separate from the 60s, but still experiencing recession, war, and failed relationships. By the very end of the decade, the popular charts were dominated by the solo career of Michael Jackson, who would continue to be the king of pop until his untimely death in 2009. All the songs you have just seen in this slide montage were in the top 10 sometime in the 1970s. Be sure and listen to them to get a feel for the softening of rock music in this decade. So where was rock amongst all these softened hits? Guitar-based rock fans had to seek out the music they loved. It is during the decade of the 70s that various FM rock station formats blossomed. This slide shows just a few of the many radio formats and some of the Southern California stations that used to play those formats. Some of these radio formats still exist today, but they may be called different names. Album-oriented rock may be called classic rock now, and progressive rock as a radio station is virtually gone as a format. With the advent of satellite radio, internet radio, and players like Pandora and Spotify, entire channels are now devoted to deep tracks, which would be AOR, or progressive rock, sometimes called art rock, without having to suit playlists to advertisers' desires. Keep in mind, in the 1970s, personal devices like MP3 players did not exist. If a song did not make it on the radio, it was not going to be heard. Does the current music format, where the consumer picks and chooses what they listen to, rather than being played a set list determined by a radio executive, make it more difficult for new music to be heard? One of the ways in which rock music became more experimental was through the fusion of various styles. In the next few slides, a few of the dominant fused styles will be examined. Please note that the fused styles we are calling classical rock is not the same as the radio or playlist format called classic rock. The first fused style is jazz rock. Although jazz and rock have similar roots in the blues, jazz is approximately 50 years older than rock. Jazz influences have been present in all rock music, even from the earliest rhythm and blues pioneers. But when these styles fused in a manner that created a separate subgenre in the 70s, it was a rather natural pairing. Chicago's use of a prominent brass section helps define this group as jazz rock. Also, when you listen to their song, 25 or 6/4, notice the very unusual chords played by the brass at the very end of the song. These are extended jazz harmonies. Many rock groups were tired of all the heavy messages in some 60s music. Chicago is one of the 70s groups that took a pointed, apolitical stance with their music. Their song, 25 or 6/4, is simply about having writer's block in the wee hours of the night. The choice to avoid political content in their lyrics, combined with their jazz-fused sound, place Chicago in a softer rock category. Santana's jazz fusion can be heard in their Latin jazz rhythms, and Steely Dan was greatly influenced by keyboard jazz greats like Horace Silver, which can be heard in their hit, "Ricky, Don't Lose That Number." The next fused style is classical rock. It is also known as progressive rock or art rock. It is a fusion of classical musical elements and rock instruments. This was a very large subgenre in the 1970s, and a style that many bands experimented with regardless of their own genre. Each group within this style incorporates different elements of classical music. The godfathers of this style are the 60s band The Moody Blues, with their use of the entire London Symphony Orchestra. This fused style is large, theatric, includes long jam sessions, and it often includes some element of staging. The English classic rock group Pink Floyd's historic album Dark Side of the Moon displays many classical music elements and revolutionary studio techniques. It has remained on the charts for close to 30 years. This slide gives a detailed description of the track On the Run from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Some of this description is referring to synthesizers used for special effects. The E3, G3, A3 portion are letters of the musical alphabet, and the numbers specify octave ranges for those musical notes. This is a track to listen to with a good set of headphones in order to hear the things like the Doppler effect and panning, which is moving from right to left. In fact, much of Pink Floyd's music should be listened to with headphones. Another epic album by Pink Floyd is their rock opera The Wall. This album and subsequent film were released late in the 1970s. The stage performances of The Wall included enormous blow-up characters and the construction of a huge wall that covered the entire stage. At a certain point in the live performance, the wall is torn down brick by brick. Some central themes run through many of Pink Floyd's albums. The members of the band were young children during the Second World War, so many of their themes surround those difficult times: airplanes, war images, isolation, anxiety, and mental illness. Both Roger Waters and founding member Syd Barrett suffered from mental health issues. Country rock is similar to jazz rock in that country music was a strong influence to early rhythm and blues. But in the 70s, rock musicians embraced closer ties to traditional country styles and sounds. Bands like the Allman Brothers' deep Southern country sound has influenced countless bands in this genre. The Eagles' entire album, Desperado, was inspired by the real Wild West Dalton gang. Sometimes this subgenre is also called Southern Fried Rock. In the 70s, soul music also takes a bit of a softer quality. The music of Stevie Wonder matures and reflects the issues he is experiencing as a father, husband, and African American. Many place his album Talking Book as his best, but his greatest selling work is his double album Songs in the Key of Life, which contain many autobiographical tracks. Along with the fused rock of the decade, the folk music takes on a more personal focus. Many singer-songwriters take on the issues of the rapidly changing roles of marriage, divorce, and the traditional roles of men and women. In addition to relationship issues, artists were confronting issues of sexuality and gender roles. Glam rock artists pushed the boundaries for these elements of society. David Bowie's space-aged androgynous persona of Ziggy Stardust set the standard for many other glam rock performers in this genre. Most of these artists wore costumes and incorporated sexual innuendos in their performances. A close cousin to glam rock is heavy metal theater. And many textbooks do not even separate the two styles. Heavy metal theater tends to be harder rock in a heavy metal style, and the theatrics converge on the horrific and absurd. Iggy Pop was known for rubbing peanut butter all over his body and rolling in broken glass during his performances, while Alice Cooper recreated his own execution by hanging, guillotine, and shooting night after night. No other genre represents the 1970s recession, escapism, self-absorption, era, or excess as disco does. The majority of this music was designed for quick appeal, fast sales, and highlighting the dancers at the clubs rather than the artists performing the music. Often, during difficult economic and social times, music can offer an escape from reality. Disco did that for many people. It also threatened many live instrumentalists with its preponderance of electrically generated sounds. Drummers were especially threatened. Disco was an escape from reality. It was also a product of corporate rock, which also dominated the music of the 70s. Only 4 companies held all the power in the recording industry: so bands felt enormous pressure to conform and churn out hits. Concurrent with corporate rock and disco was the rise of the huge arena rock shows. The 100,000 in attendance shows made many people in the music industry very rich, but it also created a huge divide between the audience and the bands. Some artists would exacerbate this by having 20 to 30-minute long jam sessions with their backs turned to the audience. Some rock fans were insulted by this attitude. Later artists, like Bruce Springsteen, created a better relationship between the audience and the performer, while he still managed to fill large stadiums and arenas. Even the arena band Queen made an attempt to regain a connection to audiences by writing songs like We Will Rock You, specifically to engage audiences in its simple rhythmic pattern. In next week's slide lecture, we will examine the rock that reacted to the changes in the 70s.